My name is Aubrey Lawson. I'm 34 years old, and I never imagined a family gathering could turn into a revelation that would shake me to my core. Last fall, I found myself sitting at my parents' dining table in Old Louisville, sipping on what should have been a comforting cup of coffee, thinking, really thinking, that everything had returned to normal. The house smelled faintly of cinnamon and polished wood. The sunlight streaming through the lace curtains made the worn dining room table glow, and for a few fleeting moments, I almost believed my family's past drama had finally settled. And then, Tucker spoke. My younger brother, all charm and a grin that had always made my heart twist in equal parts affection and exasperation, announced his wedding date. The room erupted. Excitement buzzed in every corner. Phones were whipped out, Instagram-worthy pictures were passed around, and suddenly, the conversation shifted from polite small talk to extravagant plans. A farm venue, imported flowers, and a honeymoon in Hawaii. Everyone was smiling, everyone was laughing, and for the first time in months, I thought maybe this would be a day without tension. Until the guest list came up, and my name wasn't on it. I laughed because maybe it was a mistake. That's what anyone would assume, right? Surely this was a clerical error or a miscommunication. After all, I had been there for Tucker through everything. I had paid off his credit card debt from last year. I had covered half of the deposits he begged me for when he was convinced that his big day could only happen if I intervened financially. And now, sitting in the middle of the living room, watching the family's excitement bubble over, I realized with a sinking feeling that I was the only one not laughing. I turned to my mother, trying to keep my voice light, trying to mask the shock with humor. "Where's my invitation?" I asked. She didn't even look up from her plate. "It's just a small event, honey," she said, as if that explained everything. A small event with 300 guests, I thought bitterly. A small event with a $40,000 flower budget. My laughter caught in my throat. That was the moment it hit me. The realization spread through me like ice water. They had been using my name, my trust, my money, and now, after everything, I was no longer needed at the table. My presence wasn't part of the plan anymore. I didn't say anything else at the table. I nodded, smiled, and tried to engage in polite conversation, but inside, a storm was brewing. The more I thought about it, the more the pieces fit together. It wasn't just the wedding, this was a pattern, a family habit that had always hovered in the background, subtle but sharp. And now, I was finally seeing it in full. 2 weeks later, back in my apartment in Nashville, the incident wouldn't leave my mind. I paced my living room, staring at the walls, trying to convince myself that maybe I had overreacted, but deep down I knew I hadn't. This wasn't about a wedding. It was about betrayal, trust, and manipulation. I picked up the phone and called my parents' house in Old Louisville. My mother answered on the second ring, cheerful and seemingly unaware, until my voice cracked across the line. "Why am I not invited to Tucker's wedding?" I asked, cutting through pleasantries. "After everything I've done for him?" There was silence on the other end, followed by a soft, dismissive laugh. "Oh, honey, it's just a small event," she repeated. "Tucker and Palmer want to keep the guest list tight." Then my father came on the extension without saying hello. "Your brother gets to decide who's there on his day, Aubrey," he said calmly. That was it. No apology, no acknowledgement of my contributions or sacrifices. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with notifications from the family group chat. My older sister, Kendall Lawson Murray, 38, the perennial peacemaker when it suited her, had already typed out a 3-paragraph message, scolding me for overreacting and reminding me that weddings were stressful enough without adding family drama to the mix. I stared at the screen, blinking at the words that felt like knives disguised as concern. Slowly, I closed the chat and opened something else entirely, the online portal for the trust our grandmother had left us. Grandma Lawson had passed 12 years ago, but she had been smart, meticulous, and protective in ways that only now I fully appreciated. She had put me in charge of the trust when I turned 27, trusting that I was the only grandchild who had ever truly balanced a checkbook. The principal was supposed to remain untouched until each grandchild turned 35. Withdrawals were allowed for living expenses and emergencies, but anything over $10,000 required my handwritten signature on a form notarized and kept on file by the bank. I logged in that night for the first time in months. My eyes nearly popped out of my head. $92,000 had been withdrawn in 4 separate transactions over the past 6 weeks. 4 forms, all carrying what appeared to be my signature, notarized at the UPS store, 3 miles from my parents' house. I zoomed in on the scanned documents until my vision blurred. At first glance, the handwriting resembled mine. Same slant, same pressure. But something was off. The loops on the Y's were too round. The cross on every T was just slightly higher than mine. Someone had practiced. I remembered the weekend I drove down for Tucker's engagement party. He had handed me a clipboard full of papers while Palmer poured champagne. "Just some boring deposit forms," he said. "Need your signature to hold the venue date." I had been tired, happy for him, and without a second thought, I signed 4 blank withdrawal request forms. That's when the truth hit me. The money hadn't gone to deposits. It had gone straight into a joint checking account under Tucker and Palmer's names. I traced each transaction meticulously. $30,000 wired to the farm venue outside Louisville, another $25,000 to a Miami florist for imported orchids and Ecuadorian roses, $15,000 to a travel agent in Lexington for first-class tickets to Maui, and the rest dispersed across restaurants, bars, and a jewelry store on Bardstown Road. I sat on my couch until 3 a.m., forwarding PDFs to myself, taking screenshots of every page, every timestamp, every forged Y loop. When the sun came up, I hadn't slept, but I knew exactly what those signatures had bought them. A wedding I wasn't allowed to attend, paid for with money I wasn't supposed to touch for another 4 years. And the worst part? They thought I'd never notice. The first morning after discovering the withdrawals, I sat on my couch with my laptop open, staring at the numbers in disbelief. $92,000. Gone. 4 separate withdrawals over 6 weeks, and every single one had been authorized with what appeared to be my signature. I felt my stomach drop as I reread the transaction details again and again. It didn't make sense at first because I hadn't signed any withdrawals. Not like that. Not for luxury weddings, flights to Maui, or imported orchids. Not for anything that could be construed as frivolous. I sat in silence for a long time, letting the enormity of it sink in. The living room was quiet, except for the faint hum of my refrigerator, the ticking of the wall clock, and my own heartbeat. I remembered that weekend I'd driven down for Tucker's engagement party. He had handed me a stack of forms, a clipboard so thick it made my fingers ache. Palmer had poured champagne, and everyone was smiling and chatting. I didn't think to read them carefully. Why would I? It was Tucker, my brother. He was smiling. I was tired. I trusted him, and that trust had been weaponized. I zoomed in on the forms again. At first glance, the signatures looked like mine. Same slant, same pressure. But then I noticed it. The loops on the Y's were just a little too round, the cross on the T slightly higher than my usual mark. Someone had practiced. Someone had forged my signature meticulously, hoping I'd never notice. My pulse quickened as I realized what had actually happened. The money hadn't been used for anything I approved. It had gone straight into a joint checking account under Tucker Lawson and Palmer Harvey's names. The trail was painfully clear. $30,000 wired to the farm venue outside Louisville. Another $25,000 sent to a Miami florist for imported orchids and Ecuadorian roses. $15,000 to a travel agent in Lexington for first-class tickets to Maui. And the remaining $22,000 spread across restaurants, bars, and a jewelry store on Bardstown Road. Every cent accounted for. Every dollar spent on extravagances I wasn't allowed to attend. I couldn't breathe. By 3 a.m., I was still at my laptop, forwarding PDFs to myself, taking screenshots of every statement, every withdrawal form, every timestamp, and zooming in on every tiny detail of those forged signatures. It was painstaking work, but I needed proof, not just for myself, but in case I ever needed to take legal action. I was shaking when I finally picked up my phone and called my best friend, Gabrielle Mann. She was the only person I trusted with numbers, spreadsheets, and hard evidence. "Gabrielle," I whispered, my voice shaking. "You need to see this." She picked up on the first ring. Within minutes, I had screen shared all 4 withdrawal forms and the bank statements. Gabrielle poured herself coffee on the other end of the line, listening intently as I walked her through the timeline and my suspicions. 10 minutes later, she exhaled a long, deliberate breath. "Aubrey, every one of these signatures is real," she said calmly, but I could hear the tension in her voice. The pressure, the ink bleed, the tiny flick on the capital L. "That's you. You were tricked into signing these in person." My stomach sank even further. I had handed Tucker those exact pages myself. I had been complicit without realizing it, and the betrayal cut deeper than I could describe. I could feel the floor tilt under me, the room spin. Gabrielle stayed calm, guiding me through the next steps like she had rehearsed for a situation exactly like this. Step 1. Protect the trust immediately. She instructed me to open a new tab and email the trust officer at the private bank division in Cincinnati, someone Grandma had personally chosen 15 years ago. I drafted the email carefully, attaching every scan, every statement, and wrote in the subject line, "Possible unauthorized distributions. Urgent freeze requested." By morning I had a reply. "Account frozen effective immediately. No further disbursements until written resolution or court order." My hands shook as I read it. The legal wheels were turning, and for the first time since that dreadful dinner in Louisville, I felt a flicker of control. Next, Gabrielle helped me forward all documentation to Harold Jenkins, the estate attorney Grandma had kept on retainer until the day she died. Harold called personally, his voice calm and steady, the type of voice that makes you trust every word. He confirmed my worst fears. The withdrawals violated the trust terms, plain and simple. Living expenses were allowed, luxury weddings and Hawaii honeymoons were not. Within hours, Harold was drafting a formal demand letter. Tucker and Palmer had 30 days to return $92,000 plus accrued interest, or face a civil suit for breach of fiduciary duty and conversion of trust property in Jefferson County Circuit Court. "We'll win," Harold said, matter of fact. "Kentucky judges do not look kindly on people raiding Grandma's money for orchids and flights to Maui. I didn't call anyone in the family. I didn't text, I didn't warn, I didn't justify. I waited. 2 days later, Palmer's frantic texts arrived first. Then Kendall's voice note, long, pleading, and impossible to listen to more than once. My mother left voicemail after voicemail, each softer than the last, begging me to call, to fix this as a family. I saved everything but said nothing. Silence became my weapon. And that's when I realized this wasn't just about money. This was about reclaiming my place, my voice, my authority. They thought they could erase me. They thought they could steal from me and hide behind smiles, champagne, and Hawaii honeymoon fantasies. But I wasn't going to let them get away with it. The moment I realized the full scale of what Tucker and Palmer had done, I knew that patience and planning were my only allies. I had the proof, I had the law on my side, and I refused to be the family's doormat any longer. But taking action wasn't just about confronting them, it was about strategy, evidence, and making sure the entire process was airtight. Gabrielle guided me through every step. She had the calm precision of someone who had untangled financial disasters hundreds of times, and I clung to her voice like a lifeline. "First, protect the trust," she said firmly. "Freeze all disbursements. Then, document everything. This isn't just numbers, It's a paper trail that proves fraud. I drafted the email to the trust officer at the private bank division in Cincinnati, someone Grandma had personally vetted and trusted. I attached all 4 withdrawal forms, all statements, all screenshots, and wrote the subject line with urgency. Possible unauthorized distributions, immediate freeze requested. I hit send and held my breath. By mid-morning, a reply came. Account frozen effective immediately. No further disbursements until written resolution or court order. My hands shook as I read it, but I felt a spark of relief. Step 1. Done. No more money could leave the trust while the investigation was underway. Next, Gabrielle helped me forward everything to Harold Jenkins, the estate attorney my grandmother had kept on retainer for decades. His voice on the phone was calm, almost soothing, the way older Kentucky lawyers still are. "Aubrey," he said, "the withdrawals violated the trust terms. Plain and simple. Living expenses are allowed. Luxury weddings and trips to Hawaii are not. I will draft a formal demand letter. Tucker and Palmer have 30 days to return the money plus interest, or we will file a civil suit in Jefferson County Circuit Court." I could almost hear the words echoing in my mind. Breach of fiduciary duty, conversion of trust property, civil suit. For years, I had been the quiet, accommodating Lawson sibling, the one who paid off credit cards, covered deposits, and cleaned up the family messes. But now, I had the law, and Grandma's foresight, on my side. I wasn't just fighting for money. I was reclaiming respect, my agency, my authority. I didn't warn Tucker, Palmer, or anyone else in the family. I didn't send a single text. I didn't call. Silence became my weapon. 2 days later, the first response came from Palmer. A frantic string of texts, starting polite, quickly turning desperate. "Why are you doing this? The wedding means so much to us. Please, Aubrey, think about how hurtful this is," she wrote. I didn't reply. Kendall tried next, sending a voice note I listened to once, and never again. Her words were laced with guilt and reasoning, trying to convince me that I was punishing the entire family for one mistake. My mother called 3 times in one afternoon, each voicemail softer than the last, each more pleading. "Aubrey, call me. Let's fix this as a family." I saved them all, but I said nothing, not a word. That weekend, I made a decision. I wasn't going to wait passively while the wedding preparations continued, funded by money I was supposed to inherit. I booked a flight back to Louisville, but I didn't tell anyone. I wasn't going to confront anyone directly. I wanted to observe, to see how they were spending the money, to watch the consequences of their choices unfold without interference. I landed quietly, rented a car, and drove straight to the country club where Palmer's bridal shower was scheduled. The room was filled with chatter, laughter, and pastel decorations. Palmer's eyes widened the second she saw me, frozen between surprise and panic. I smiled, handed her a gift I had wrapped that morning, and took a seat at the table with the other bridesmaids. I drank 2 mimosas, complimented the cake, and listened as Palmer bragged about the final payment due to the farm venue and how the upgraded floral arches were nearly complete, paid for with the $92,000 that should never have been touched. Not once did I bring it up. I wanted her to enjoy the illusion of control, while the law and I quietly held all the cards. I left the bridal shower the next morning without saying goodbye to anyone else. By the time I returned to Nashville, Harold had already received the signed return receipt from the certified demand letter. The 30-day clock was ticking, and for the first time in months, I wasn't scrambling to maintain peace. I was finally in control. The feeling was intoxicating. For so long, I had been erased, overlooked, and taken advantage of. But now the tables had turned. Tucker and Palmer had thought they could exploit my trust, take my money, and enjoy the lavish life I had paid for, all without consequence. They were about to learn the hard way that underestimating Aubrey Lawson was a mistake they would regret. And I was ready. 3 weeks before the wedding, the tension hung in the air like an invisible curtain. Tucker and Palmer were blissfully unaware, or perhaps arrogantly confident, that I knew exactly what they had done. I had chosen a path of quiet observation, a strategy to watch them squirm while the law silently closed in. I booked a cheap flight back to Louisville, careful not to alert anyone. My plan was simple: attend Palmer's bridal shower, blend in, watch, listen, and gather more details. I wanted to see how my family had spent the $92,000, luxury they had believed I would never notice. The day of the shower, I arrived at the country club early. The lawns were manicured, the halls lined with ribbons and pastel-colored balloons. Inside, laughter and chatter filled the room, a soundtrack of celebration I was determined to observe without interruption. Palmer's eyes immediately found me. Her expression froze: surprise, panic, uncertainty, a flicker of guilt. But she quickly masked it with a polite, forced smile. I returned it with a calm, almost serene smile, and she didn't know how to respond. I handed her the gift I had wrapped that morning. It was a thoughtful, simple present, nothing extravagant. A small gesture that allowed me to sit down and watch without drawing attention to the storm brewing inside me. I took a seat among the other bridesmaids, sipping mimosas, pretending to chat and laugh, while mentally cataloging every detail. The conversations around me were almost unbearable. Palmer proudly discussed the final payment to the farm venue, a sprawling property called Redbud Hollow just past Shelbyville, and how the upgraded floral arches had been installed. She didn't know it, but all of it had been funded with money that should have been untouched in Grandma's trust for another 4 years. Every word she spoke was a reminder of the betrayal. I watched the dynamics between the guests, friends of Palmer, distant relatives, my own family members, and realized just how isolated I had been. I had been erased from this celebration, the one that should have been marked by love and inclusion. Yet here I was, observing silently, a shadow in plain sight. I noticed the expensive details that my family assumed I wouldn't catch. Imported orchids from Miami, crystal decorations that glimmered under the chandelier, tables lined with catered delicacies and custom desserts. Each lavish detail was a reminder of the money stolen under the guise of a small event. My stomach churned, but my resolve strengthened. I was calm, patient, and in complete control, because unlike them, I had the law on my side. Palmer spent the afternoon glancing at me every 5 minutes, her mind clearly running through scenarios, trying to guess if or when I would confront her. I didn't. I let her wonder. I let her fear build silently. She was trapped in a game she hadn't even realized she was playing, and I was holding all the cards. I drank another mimosa and watched the way people moved through the room. I took mental notes: the vendors mentioned, the dates of final payments, the boutique shops where Palmer had spent hours shopping. Each detail was ammunition, not for confrontation, but for patience. My revenge wouldn't be loud, it wouldn't be dramatic, it would be precise, calculated, and inescapable. By the time the shower ended, I excused myself quietly. No goodbyes, no speeches. I returned to my hotel room in Nashville with the satisfaction of having observed the reality of their extravagance firsthand, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I smiled. The 30-day window was still ticking. Tucker and Palmer had no idea that their reckoning was already set in motion. Later that evening, I received a text from my Aunt Teresa, who still lived 5 houses down from my parents. She had been keeping an eye on the family as she always did. Her message was short: a single photo of Tucker pulling up in a brand-new silver Land Rover, Palmer carrying shopping bags from boutiques on Bardstown Road, and a single raised eyebrow emoji. No commentary, no warning, just a glimpse of what had been bought with money that wasn't theirs. I stared at the image for a long moment. Then I put the phone down and returned to work, returning to the routine of normal life while the family's chaos unfolded without me. Silence, observation, patience. These had become my weapons. I wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. The 30-day countdown had begun. Every day I woke up with a mixture of anticipation and calm satisfaction, knowing that Tucker and Palmer were out there, unaware that their fantasy wedding was about to collide with reality. I had done nothing reckless, nothing impulsive, just followed the evidence, documented every transaction, and let the law do its work. Life in Nashville went on. I went to work, took my morning runs, and caught up with friends, but the shadow of what had happened in Louisville lingered in every thought. I felt a strange combination of empowerment and detachment. For the first time, I realized that reclaiming my voice wasn't about confrontation, it was about patience. My silence had become the loudest message I could send. 3 weeks before the wedding, Aunt Teresa sent me the first signal. A simple text. A photo of Tucker arriving in a brand new silver Land Rover. Palmer staggering under shopping bags from boutiques on Bardstown Road. A single raised eyebrow emoji. That tiny symbol carried more weight than words ever could. They were spending, flaunting, showing off, utterly unaware of the legal storm building just outside their door. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Observation had become a game, and I was the only one playing with all the pieces on the board. The farm venue, Redbud Hollow, had begun sending increasingly sharp emails to Tucker and Palmer. Harold forwarded each one to me. They were polite at first, reminders of final payments and deadlines, but gradually the tone sharpened, urgency creeping into every line. Tucker and Palmer had no idea I was watching from miles away, waiting, not for vengeance and anger, but for the consequences they had earned. Every call and text from my family went unanswered. Mom's soft pleas, Kendall's attempts to guilt me, Palmer's frantic messages. I saved them all, cataloged them, but did not engage. They were scrambling, and for the first time, I was not. I remembered that Thanksgiving dinner where it all began. The moment I realized I was being erased. That moment had been painful, humiliating, and maddening. But now, months later, I could see the entire arc, the betrayal, the misuse of trust, the extravagant spending, all leading to this moment of silent reckoning. 2 days before the wedding, Harold called. His voice was calm, professional, but there was a quiet satisfaction in it that mirrored my own. "They've received the demand letter," he said. "If the funds aren't returned, we will proceed with a civil suit. The paper trail is airtight. Kentucky courts do not favor those who misuse trust funds for personal luxuries." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "And if they ignore it?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "We'll win," he replied simply. "Every dollar they took is documented. Every transaction is accounted for. It's indisputable." On the morning of the wedding, I sat in my apartment, sipping coffee, scrolling through emails and messages, observing from a distance. Tucker and Palmer had no idea that their carefully constructed illusion of control was about to unravel. The money they had spent, the extravagance they flaunted, the guests who had cheered them on, all of it had been purchased with stolen funds, and the law was now waiting to intervene. I thought about the moment I first discovered the withdrawals. I remembered the cold realization, the betrayal, the panic, the fury. And now, I felt none of those things. Instead, I felt something far stronger: clarity, power, and justice. I had been patient. I had been strategic. I had watched, documented, and prepared. The wedding day came and went. I did not attend. I did not call. I did not engage. But behind the scenes, the legal wheels had begun turning. Tucker and Palmer's sense of security, their belief that they could get away with erasing me, had been shattered silently, invisibly, and that, I realized, was the ultimate revenge. Not confrontation, not shouting, not social humiliation, but the quiet, unstoppable certainty of justice. For the first time in years, I felt completely untouchable. They had underestimated me. They had counted on my kindness, my trust, my loyalty. And now, they were learning, far too late that Aubrey Lawson was someone you could not erase, no matter how hard you tried. I smiled, leaned back in my chair, and took a deep breath. It had taken months, but I had reclaimed everything that was mine: my money, my voice, and my dignity. And the best part? I had done it without ever raising my voice.